Sarah Martinez had always been good with numbers and details. That's what made her perfect for her job at the military training facility outside Fort Bragg. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., she would arrive at the shooting range complex, clipboard in hand, ready to reset the electronic targeting systems that the Special Forces units used for their training. The work was routine but important. She would walk from lane to lane, checking each computerized target, making sure the sensors worked properly, and recording the data from the previous day's training sessions. The targets were sophisticated pieces of equipment, not just simple bullseyes but reactive systems that could simulate moving enemies, provide instant feedback on accuracy, and track every shot fired. Sarah had been doing this job for 3 years and she thought she knew everything about the facility. The concrete building was massive, with dozens of indoor shooting lanes stretching back 100 meters. The walls were thick enough to contain the sound of automatic weapons fire, and the ventilation system was powerful enough to clear the air of gunpowder smoke within minutes. Most days, she worked alone. The soldiers would come in later, usually around 7 a.m. for their scheduled training sessions. Sarah preferred it this way. She could work in peace, listening to music through her earphones while she methodically checked each system. The targeting. Computers were like old friends to her now. She knew exactly which ones needed extra attention, which sensors were getting temperamental, and how long each reset sequence should take. On this particular Tuesday morning in March, everything seemed normal. The previous day had been busy. She could tell because the data log showed heavy usage across all lanes. Multiple units had been through, firing thousands of rounds. Sarah started her routine at lane 1, working her way down the line systematically. She noticed that lane 15 had some unusual readings. The target system there showed impact patterns that didn't match the typical training exercises. Instead of the standard groupings she was used to seeing, the hits were scattered in a very specific pattern, one that suggested someone had been practicing something different from normal qualification courses. Sarah made a note on her clipboard and continued with her work. She had learned early in her job not to ask too many questions about what the different units were training for. Her supervisor had made it clear that her job was to maintain the equipment, not to analyze the training data, but she couldn't help noticing patterns after 3 years of seeing the same types of exercises day after day. As she worked on resetting lane 23, she heard footsteps behind her. This was unusual. The soldiers weren't supposed to arrive for another hour. Sarah turned around and saw a tall man in military fatigues watching her work. He was older than most of the trainees she was used to seeing, probably in his late 30s with short gray hair and intense blue eyes. "You're Sarah, right?" he asked, his voice calm and professional. "The technician who handles the targeting systems?" Sarah nodded, pulling out her earphones. "Yes, sir. Are you here early for training?" "The range isn't officially open until 7. The man smiled slightly. "I'm Master Chief Petty Officer Jake Sullivan. I was hoping to get some practice in before the official session starts. Would that be possible?" Sarah had heard that title before. Master Chief was a high rank in the Navy. She assumed he must be with one of the SEAL teams that trained at the facility. She had seen SEALs before, but usually only from a distance. They kept to themselves and had their own section of the facility. "I'm still doing the system checks," Sarah explained. "But lanes 1 through 10 are already reset and ready to go. Just let me activate the power sequence for you." She walked over to the control panel and began entering the startup commands. The electronic targets in the first section hummed to life, their LED indicators showing green for ready status. Master Chief Sullivan followed her, watching as she worked through the activation process. "You really know these systems well," he observed. "How long have you been working here?" 3 years, Sarah replied, finishing the startup sequence. "I know every quirk these machines have. Some of them are getting old and need special handling." Sullivan nodded appreciatively. "That kind of expertise is valuable. These systems are pretty sophisticated. Not everyone could handle maintaining them." Sarah felt a small surge of pride. It wasn't often that her work was recognized by the military personnel who used the facility. Most of them barely acknowledged her presence, treating her like part of the equipment rather than a person who played an important role in their training. "What kind of training will you be doing today?" Sarah asked, then quickly added, I mean, just so I know which target programs to have ready. Sullivan was quiet for a moment, studying her face as if trying to decide something. Actually, I was hoping you might be able to help me with something a little different, something that requires someone who really understands how these systems work. Sarah felt a flutter of curiosity mixed with nervousness. In 3 years, no one had ever asked for her help with anything beyond basic equipment maintenance. What did you have in mind? Well, Sullivan said slowly, I need to test some very specific scenarios. The standard target programs won't work for what I need to practice. I was hoping someone with your technical knowledge might be able to help me modify the settings. Sarah considered this request. It was outside her normal responsibilities, but it wasn't against any rules she knew of. And Master Chief Sullivan seemed professional and legitimate. He obviously had clearance to be in the facility. I could probably help with that, she said. What kind of modifications are you looking for? Sullivan glanced around the empty range, then looked back at Sarah. It's for a very specialized mission. The targets need to move in specific patterns at precise speeds, with timing that matches real-world scenarios. The standard programs are too predictable. Sarah nodded. This made sense. She had always wondered why the targeting systems had so many advanced features that never seemed to get used. The equipment was capable of much more complex scenarios than the simple exercises she usually saw. I can access the programming interface, she said, but I'd need to know exactly what parameters you want me to set. Sullivan smiled, and for the first time since he'd appeared, he seemed to relax slightly. I was hoping you'd say that. This could be exactly what I need. As Sarah led him over to the programming terminal, she had no idea that this simple request would change everything about her quiet, routine job. She thought she was just helping a SEAL with some advanced target practice. She had no way of knowing that Master Chief Sullivan was preparing for a mission that would test not just his shooting skills, but her technical expertise in ways she never could have imagined. Over the next 2 weeks, Master Chief Sullivan became a regular presence at the range during Sarah's early morning shift. What had started as a simple request for modified target programming had evolved into something much more complex and intriguing. Sullivan would arrive each morning at 6 a.m. sharp, always carrying a small notebook filled with detailed sketches and measurements. He would show Sarah specific scenarios he needed to practice, targets that moved at unusual angles, appeared and disappeared at irregular intervals, and required split-second timing to engage successfully. Sarah found herself looking forward to these morning sessions. Sullivan treated her as a valued partner rather than just a technician. He would explain why he needed certain modifications, always in general terms that didn't reveal classified information, but with enough detail that Sarah could understand the complexity of what he was preparing for. The thing about real situations, Sullivan explained one morning as Sarah programmed a sequence of targets that would appear for only 2 seconds each, is that they never go according to plan. Everything happens too fast, and you have to make decisions based on incomplete information. Sarah watched as Sullivan practiced the sequence she had created. His movements were fluid and precise, but she could see the intense concentration on his face. This wasn't just target practice. This was preparation for something that could be life or death. Are you preparing for a specific mission? Sarah asked, then quickly added, You don't have to tell me if it's classified. Sullivan paused in his reloading. Let's just say there are situations where traditional training methods don't prepare you for what you might encounter. Your programming is helping me bridge that gap. As the days passed, Sarah began to understand that Sullivan was dealing with scenarios that required more than just accurate shooting. The target sequences he requested involved complex decision-making, distinguishing between threats and innocent bystanders, engaging multiple targets in rapid succession while moving through changing environments. Sarah had always been good with technology, but working with Sullivan was teaching her to think about the targeting systems in completely new ways. She learned to program targets that would hide behind cover, targets that moved unpredictably, and even targets that required non-lethal responses. You have a real talent for this, Sullivan told her one morning after she had successfully programmed a particularly challenging scenario. Have you ever thought about doing more technical work with military applications? Sarah had never considered such a possibility. Her job at the range was just that, a job. But working with Sullivan was showing her that her skills could be applied to much more important and interesting problems. During their third week of working together, Sullivan's requests became more urgent and specific. He began asking for scenarios that seemed to involve protecting someone else, targets that would require him to provide covering fire while moving a non-combatant to safety. "This is different from what we've been practicing," Sarah observed as she watched Sullivan run through a sequence where he had to engage threats while staying in specific positions. "The mission profile has evolved," Sullivan said carefully. "I need to be prepared for situations where I'm not just responsible for completing an objective, but for keeping someone else safe." Sarah noticed that Sullivan's usual confidence seemed strained. He was making mistakes in sequences that he had mastered days earlier, and his expression was more tense than she had ever seen it. "Is everything okay?" she asked after Sullivan missed several shots in a row, something that rarely happened. Sullivan set down his rifle and looked at her seriously. "Sarah, what I'm about to tell you needs to stay between us. The mission I'm preparing for isn't just about my performance. There's an intelligence asset, a civilian, who has information that could save a lot of lives. But getting that person to safety is going to require precise coordination between multiple team members." Sarah felt a chill of understanding. "And you're worried about the technical aspects of the operation?" "Exactly. The extraction point has electronic security systems, surveillance equipment, and communication networks that could either help us or get us all killed, depending on how they're handled." Sullivan paused, studying Sarah's face. "I need someone who understands complex systems and can think on their feet when technology doesn't work the way it's supposed to." Sarah realized where this conversation was heading, and her heart began racing. "You're talking about bringing me on a mission. I'm talking about the fact that my team needs a technical specialist. And after working with you for 3 weeks, I know you're capable of much more than maintaining targeting systems." Sullivan's voice was calm, but Sarah could hear the urgency underneath. "This isn't just about shooting accurately anymore, it's about using technology to save lives." Sarah sat down heavily in one of the plastic chairs near the control panel. 3 weeks ago, her biggest challenge had been figuring out why Lane 7's target sensor was giving inconsistent readings. Now a Navy SEAL was suggesting that she join a classified mission that could involve real danger. "I don't have military training," she said. "I've never been in a combat situation. I don't even know how to use a weapon properly." "Those skills can be taught quickly to someone with the right mindset," Sullivan replied. "But what can't be taught quickly is the kind of technical intuition you've shown here. The ability to understand complex systems and make them work under pressure. That's something you either have or you don't." Sarah thought about her 3 years at the facility, the countless hours she had spent learning every detail of the targeting systems, the satisfaction she felt when she solved a particularly difficult technical problem. She realized that Sullivan was right. She did have a natural understanding of how these systems worked. "What exactly would I have to do?" she asked. Sullivan pulled out his notebook and showed her a detailed diagram. "The target location has a security network that controls everything from door locks to communication jammers. Our intelligence suggests that a skilled technician could access the system and give us control over the facility's electronic infrastructure." Sarah studied the diagram. It was more complex than anything she had worked with, but she could see the logical connections between the different components. "This is like a much more sophisticated version of our targeting network here." "That's exactly what I thought when I first saw it," Sullivan said. "And after watching you work with our systems, I'm convinced you could handle it." Sarah felt a mixture of fear and excitement. This was an opportunity to use her skills for something that really mattered, something that could make a difference in people's lives. But it was also terrifying to think about leaving her safe, predictable job for something so dangerous and unknown. "I need time to think about this," she said. Sullivan nodded. "I understand. But I need to know soon. We're looking at a very narrow window for this operation, and if you're going to be part of it, We need to start preparing immediately." As Sarah watched Sullivan pack up his equipment and leave the range, she realized that her quiet, routine life was about to change in ways she had never imagined. The question was whether she had the courage to embrace that change. Sarah spent the entire weekend thinking about Sullivan's proposal. She walked around her small apartment, made lists of pros and cons, and even called her sister in California to talk through the decision, though she couldn't reveal any of the specific details. "It sounds like an amazing opportunity," her sister Lisa had said. "You've been complaining for months about how boring your job is. Maybe it's time to try something that actually challenges you." But Lisa didn't know that challenging meant potentially dangerous. Sarah kept thinking about all the things that could go wrong, all the ways she wasn't prepared for what Sullivan was asking her to do. On Monday morning, she arrived at work, with a decision made. She would tell Sullivan that she appreciated his confidence in her abilities, but she wasn't cut out for this kind of work. She was a technician, not a soldier. Sullivan was waiting for her in the parking lot when she arrived, at 5:30 a.m. He looked like he hadn't slept much over the weekend either. "I've been thinking about what you said," Sarah began, but Sullivan held up a hand to stop her. "Before you give me your answer, there's something else you need to know. Something that might change how you think about this." He handed her a manila folder. "This is the intelligence file on our target. Obviously, most of it is classified, but there are some parts you can see." Sarah opened the folder and found herself looking at surveillance photos of a middle-aged woman with dark hair and frightened eyes. The woman was in what appeared to be a laboratory or technical facility, surrounded by complex equipment. "Her name is Dr. Elena Vasquez," Sullivan explained. "She's a computer systems engineer who was working on a civilian project when she discovered something she wasn't supposed to see. Now she's being held by people who want to use her technical knowledge for very bad purposes." Sarah studied the photos more carefully. Dr. Vasquez looked terrified, but there was something in her expression that reminded Sarah of herself. The focused look of someone trying to solve a technical problem under extreme pressure. "She's like me," Sarah said quietly. "In many ways, yes. She's brilliant with computer systems. She understands complex networks, and right now she's the only person who can provide us with the information we need to prevent a major terrorist attack." Sullivan paused. "But she's also trapped in a facility with security systems that my team can't overcome without technical expertise." Sarah closed the folder, her hands shaking slightly. "You're saying that if I don't help, she dies?" "I'm saying that if we can't get her out safely, a lot of people die. Dr. Vasquez discovered that the facility where she's being held is being used to plan attacks on civilian targets. She has the technical specifications for those plans, but only if we can extract her along with her data." Sarah sat down on the hood of her car, trying to process this information. 3 weeks ago, her biggest worry was whether she would have enough sick days to take a long weekend. Now she was being asked to help save not just one person, but potentially hundreds or thousands of people. "What kind of training would I need?" she asked, surprising herself by asking the question rather than saying no. Sullivan's expression brightened slightly. 2 weeks of intensive preparation, basic weapons handling, communication protocols, emergency medical training, and most importantly, working with the specific systems you'd encounter on the mission. 2 weeks to learn what soldiers spend months learning. 2 weeks to learn the specific skills you'd need for this one mission. You already have the most important qualification. You understand how complex technical systems work, and you can think clearly under pressure." Sarah thought about the previous 3 weeks, working with Sullivan to create increasingly difficult target scenarios. She had enjoyed the challenge, the problem-solving aspect of programming new situations, and she had noticed that she stayed calm even when Sullivan was running high-stress training exercises. "If I say yes, what happens next?" "We leave for a secure training facility this afternoon. You'll be given a temporary security clearance and briefed on all aspects of the mission. You'll train with the other team members and learn exactly what your role would be." Sarah realized that Sullivan had been planning for her to say yes. "You already arranged for me to get time off work?" "Your supervisor has been told that you're being temporarily assigned to a classified project. Your job here will be waiting for you when you return." The certainty in Sullivan's voice when he said, "When you return," rather than "if you return," was both reassuring and terrifying. He was confident that the mission would succeed, but Sarah knew that confidence didn't guarantee safety. Who else is on the team? 4 other SEAL team members, all with specialized skills: a communications expert, a demolition specialist, a medic who also handles infiltration, and a sniper for long-range security. You'd be the 6th member, responsible for technical systems and electronic countermeasures. Sarah tried to imagine herself as part of a SEAL team. It seemed impossible, but then again, 3 weeks ago, she couldn't have imagined programming the complex target scenarios that had become routine. "Dr. Vasquez," she said, opening the folder again to look at the woman's photo. "How long has she been held captive?" 6 weeks. Our intelligence suggests that her captors are becoming impatient with her cooperation. They've started threatening her family to force her to work faster on their project. Sarah felt a surge of anger. She thought about how she would feel if someone was holding her sister hostage to force her to use her technical skills for harmful purposes. The idea of Dr. Vasquez being alone and scared, forced to help people who wanted to hurt others, was unbearable. "If I do this, if I help rescue her, what guarantee do I have that I'll be able to handle it when things go wrong?" Sullivan was quiet for a long moment. "There are no guarantees in this kind of work. But I've been watching you for 3 weeks, and I've seen how you respond when equipment malfunctions, when systems don't work the way they're supposed to, when you're under pressure to solve problems quickly. You don't panic. You think through the situation and find solutions. That's different from being shot at." "Yes, it is, but the core skill set is the same. Staying calm, thinking clearly, and using your technical knowledge to overcome obstacles. The rest is just training and preparation." Sarah looked at the photo of Dr. Vasquez one more time. The woman's eyes seemed to be pleading for help, for someone to understand the impossible situation she was in. "Okay," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it." Sullivan smiled for the first time since she'd known him. "Thank you. You're making the right choice." As Sarah walked into the facility to begin what would be her last normal day at work for a while, she wondered if she really was making the right choice. But every time she thought about backing out, she saw Dr. Vasquez's frightened face in her mind, and she knew she had to try to help. She had no idea that within 2 weeks, she would be in a foreign country, preparing to infiltrate a heavily guarded compound, relying on technical skills she was still learning and trusting people she barely knew with her life. The training facility was nothing like Sarah had expected. Located in the mountains of North Carolina, it looked like a summer camp from the outside. Simple wooden buildings, hiking trails, and a lake surrounded by pine trees. But once Sullivan led her inside, she realized this was where the most elite military units came to prepare for their most dangerous missions. "Welcome to Camp McCall," Sullivan said as they walked toward a low concrete building. "For the next 2 weeks, this is going to be your entire world." Sarah's teammates were waiting in a conference room that looked more like a high-tech command center. Maps covered every wall, computer screens showed satellite images and building schematics, and the air hummed with electronic equipment she didn't recognize. "Team, meet our technical specialist," Sullivan announced. "Sarah Martinez, 3 years of experience with advanced targeting systems and electronic countermeasures." The introductions were brief but informative. Rodriguez was the communications expert, a wiry man in his early 30s who could intercept and jam any radio signal. Thompson handled explosives, a calm woman in her late 20s who could blow open a door or disable a security system with surgical precision. Martinez, who shared Sarah's last name but wasn't related, was the medic and infiltration specialist, someone who could get into places that seemed impossible to breach. And Chen was the sniper, responsible for providing overwatch and long-range protection. "Our target is here," Sullivan said, pointing to a 3-dimensional model of a concrete compound on the central table. "Industrial facility converted into a research center. Dr. Vasquez is being held in the basement level, which is where their computer servers are located." Sarah studied the model carefully. The building was larger than she had imagined, with multiple levels both above and below ground. Where are the main power and communication lines? That's exactly the right question, Thompson said approvingly. The facility has redundant power systems, grid connection, backup generators, and an emergency battery system. The communications array is on the roof, but there are also hardwired connections to internet and phone networks. Rodriguez pulled up a detailed schematic on one of the computer screens. Our intelligence indicates that all security systems are controlled from a central server room adjacent to where Dr. Vasquez is being held. If we can get you access to that room, you should be able to control door locks, surveillance cameras, and alarm systems. Sarah felt a familiar thrill as she examined the technical diagrams. This was like solving a massive puzzle, but with much higher stakes than she was used to. What kind of security protocols am I looking at? That's where it gets complicated, Martinez said. The system was designed by Dr. Vasquez herself before she was captured. It's her own security architecture, which means it's both sophisticated and potentially exploitable if you can think the way she thinks. Over the next week, Sarah immersed herself in learning everything about the mission. Her mornings were spent in weapons training, learning to handle a pistol, understanding basic tactical movement, and practicing emergency medical procedures. But her afternoons and evenings were devoted to technical preparation. The team had constructed a replica of the target facility's computer systems. Sarah spent hours practicing penetration techniques, learning to navigate security protocols, and memorizing the layout of server rooms and network connections. She discovered that she had a natural talent for thinking like the person who had designed the system she was trying to breach. Dr. Vasquez was paranoid about external threats, Sarah observed after successfully bypassing a simulated security barrier. But she trusted internal systems more than she should have. If I can convince the network that I'm an authorized user, I can probably access anything. How would you do that? Sullivan asked. Sarah pointed to a specific connection point in the schematic. Every system has maintenance protocols for when things go wrong. If I can physically access this junction box and upload a diagnostic routine, the system will think I'm performing routine maintenance rather than an intrusion. Chen, the sniper, had been quietly watching Sarah work through these problems. You think like an engineer, she observed. That's good. Most people try to break systems by force. You're learning to outsmart them. By the end of the first week, Sarah was beginning to feel like she might actually be able to contribute to the mission. Her weapons training was progressing, slowly but steadily, and she was becoming genuinely proficient with the technical aspects of the operation. But it was during the second week that everything changed. The team received updated intelligence that made the mission much more urgent and much more dangerous. Dr. Vasquez isn't just being held captive anymore, Sullivan announced during their morning briefing. She's actively working on a project that will allow her captors to infiltrate and disable critical infrastructure systems in major cities. Power grids, water treatment plants, air traffic control, everything that keeps civilian populations safe. Sarah felt sick as she realized the implications. They're forcing her to create weapons using her technical knowledge. Worse than that, Rodriguez added, our intelligence indicates that she's close to completing the project. We're looking at a matter of days before they have everything they need to launch coordinated attacks. Thompson spread new satellite photos across the table. The facility's security has been upgraded significantly in the past week. More guards, improved surveillance, and what appears to be a new electronic jamming system that will interfere with our communications. Sarah studied the photos and felt her confidence wavering. The mission had seemed challenging but manageable when she thought they would be infiltrating a research facility. Now they were talking about breaking into what looked like a fortress, with the knowledge that failure would mean devastating attacks on innocent people. I don't know if I'm ready for this, she admitted. A week ago I was resetting targeting computers. Now you're talking about preventing terrorist attacks on major cities. Sullivan sat down across from her. Sarah, I need you to understand something. Dr. Vasquez is in the same situation you are. A week ago, she was working on civilian computer security projects. Now she's being forced to use her expertise to create weapons that could kill thousands of people. The only difference is that you have a choice. But what if I make a mistake? What if I can't access the systems when it matters? Then we adapt and find another way, Martinez said firmly. That's what teams do. No one person is responsible for the entire mission's success. Chen looked up from cleaning her rifle. The question isn't whether you'll make mistakes. The question is whether you'll let fear of making mistakes stop you from trying to help someone who desperately needs it. Sarah thought about Dr. Vasquez, working under threat and coercion to create tools for destruction, probably hoping every day that someone would come to help her. She realized that her technical skills that had seemed so mundane and routine just 3 weeks ago, might be the key to saving not just one person but potentially thousands of people. Okay, she said finally. Let's finish the training and go get her. As the team began their final preparations for deployment, Sarah had no idea that within 72 hours, she would be crouched in a ventilation shaft in a foreign country, trying to hack into a security system while gunfire echoed through the building around her. She only knew that she was committed now, and there was no turning back. The helicopter ride to the insertion point was the longest 2 hours of Sarah's life. She sat between Rodriguez and Thompson, checking her equipment for the 10th time, and trying to calm her racing heart. Through the small window she could see the landscape below changing from ocean to coastline to dense forest. Remember, once we land, we have exactly 4 hours before local security forces realize something is wrong, Sullivan said over the headset. The facility changes guard shifts at midnight, which gives us a 30-minute window, when their attention is focused inward, rather than on perimeter security. Sarah nodded, though her mouth was too dry to speak. She had memorized the mission, timeline, studied the facility blueprints until she could navigate them in her sleep and practice the technical procedures dozens of times. But now that they were actually approaching the target, everything felt surreal. The helicopter set down in a clearing 2 miles from the facility. Within minutes, the team was moving through the forest in single file, Sarah in the middle of the formation with Chen bringing up the rear. The night vision goggles made everything look green and distorted, but Sarah was surprised by how quickly she adapted to them. Moving through the forest was nothing like the controlled environment of the training facility. Branches caught on her equipment, roots threatened to trip her, and every sound seemed amplified in the darkness. But her teammates moved with fluid confidence, and their calm competence helped her stay focused. After 40 minutes of careful movement, they reached the perimeter of the facility. Through her night vision, Sarah could see the concrete building she had studied in photographs, but seeing it in person made her realize how imposing it really was. Floodlights illuminated the exterior walls, and she could see guards patrolling the rooftop. "Chen, take position on that ridge," Sullivan whispered into his radio. "You'll have clear sight lines to the entrance and the communication array." "Copy," Chen replied, and Sarah watched the sniper melt into the darkness toward higher ground. Thompson was already examining the perimeter fence with specialized tools. "Electronic sensors every 10 meters, she reported quietly. "But there's a maintenance access point here that's only passively monitored." Sarah felt a surge of nervousness as Thompson quickly disabled the fence sensors and cut a small opening. This was it. They were actually breaking into the facility. In a few minutes, she would either successfully access the security system, or they would all be in serious danger. Rodriguez and Martinez went through the fence first, followed by Sarah, with Sullivan and Thompson bringing up the rear. They moved across an open courtyard toward a service entrance that their intelligence had identified as the least monitored entry point. "Door is electronically locked," Martinez whispered after examining the entrance. "Sarah, this is your first test." Sarah knelt beside the door's electronic lock panel, her hands surprisingly steady as she connected a small device she had programmed during training. The device was designed to mimic the facility's maintenance protocols, convincing the lock system that an authorized technician was performing routine service. For 30 seconds that felt like an hour, nothing happened. Then the lock clicked open with a soft electronic beep. "We're in," Thompson said with satisfaction. The interior of the building was exactly as Sarah had memorized from the blueprints, but moving through it in reality was much more nerve-wracking than studying diagrams. Emergency lighting cast long shadows, and every sound their footsteps made seemed impossibly loud. They reached the stairwell that would take them to the basement level where Dr. Vasquez was being held. Sarah could hear voices from somewhere above them, guards making their rounds according to the schedule their intelligence had provided. 2 guards at the basement entrance. Rodriguez whispered, after checking around the corner with a fiber optic camera. Standard patrol pattern, but they're alert. Martinez and Sullivan moved forward to deal with the guards. Sarah watched in amazement as they approached the 2 men with silent efficiency. Within seconds, both guards were unconscious and secured with plastic restraints. Non-lethal takedown, Sullivan explained quietly to Sarah. They'll be unconscious for about an hour, but they'll be fine. They continued down the corridor toward the server room. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. But her mind was clear and focused. She knew exactly what she needed to do once they reached the computer systems. The server room door was protected by a more sophisticated lock than the exterior entrance. Sarah had to connect multiple devices and run a complex override sequence, but her training paid off. The lock disengaged after 2 minutes of careful work. Inside the server room, Sarah felt a moment of genuine awe. The computer systems were even more advanced than she had expected. Banks of servers humming quietly in climate-controlled racks, fiber optic cables carrying data at incredible speeds, and multiple monitor stations showing the status of building systems. "This is incredible," she whispered. "Dr. Vasquez designed something really sophisticated here. Can you access it?" Sullivan asked urgently. Sarah sat down at the main terminal and began the infiltration sequence she had practiced hundreds of times. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with increasing confidence as the system responded exactly the way she had expected. "I'm in," she announced after 5 minutes of concentrated work. "I have access to security cameras, door controls, alarm systems, and communication networks." On the monitors around her, Sarah could see live feeds from cameras throughout the facility. She quickly located Dr. Vasquez in a room 2 corridors away. A tired-looking woman hunched over a computer workstation, clearly working under duress. "There she is," Sarah said, pointing to the monitor. "And there are 2 guards outside her door." "Can you unlock her room remotely?" Martinez asked. "Yes, but the moment I do, the guards will know something is wrong." Sarah studied the camera feeds, thinking through the problem. "But I can create a distraction. If I trigger a false alarm in another part of the building, the guards might leave their posts to investigate." Sullivan nodded approvingly. "Do it, Sarah." Accessed the fire safety system and triggered smoke alarms on the opposite side of the building. On the monitor, she watched as guards throughout the facility began responding to what appeared to be a fire emergency. "Perfect," Sullivan said as they watched the 2 guards outside Dr. Vasquez's room run toward the source of the alarms. "Martinez, Thompson, go get her. Rodriguez, monitor communications. Sarah, keep watching those cameras and let us know if anyone's coming back." As Martinez and Thompson moved through the corridors toward Dr. Vasquez's location, Sarah felt a strange sense of power and responsibility. Through the security system, she could see everything that was happening in the building. She was like the team's electronic eyes and ears, able to guide them around obstacles and warn them of dangers. 2 more guards heading back toward the basement level, she reported into her radio. "They'll reach the main corridor in about 60 seconds. "Copy that," Sullivan replied. "Can you slow them down?" Sarah quickly accessed the building's elevator controls and disabled the system, forcing the guards to use the stairs. Then she turned off the lights in the stairwell, buying her teammates precious extra time. On the monitor showing Dr. Vasquez's room, Sarah watched Martinez and Thompson enter. The woman looked terrified at first, then confused, then hopeful as Martinez quickly explained who they were and why they were there. "We've got her," Martinez reported. "But she says there are important files on her computer that we need to retrieve. Data about the terrorist plot and evidence of who's behind it." Sarah felt a moment of panic. They hadn't planned for this. The mission was supposed to be a simple extraction. But she realized that Dr. Vasquez was right. If they left without the evidence, the people responsible might just find another expert to force into completing their project. "I can access her computer remotely," Sarah said. "Give me 2 minutes to download everything." Working quickly, Sarah connected to Dr. Vasquez's workstation through the facility's network. The files she found made her blood run cold. Detailed. Plans for attacking power grids, water systems, and transportation networks in major cities. Dr. Vasquez had been forced to create digital weapons that could cause massive civilian casualties. Got it, Sarah reported as the download completed. All the evidence is saved. But as she spoke, she noticed movement on multiple camera feeds that made her stomach drop. Armed men were entering the building, not the regular guards they had expected, but what looked like a military response team. "We have a problem," she announced urgently. "Multiple hostiles entering the building. They're equipped like professional soldiers, not facility security." Sullivan's voice crackled over the radio. "How many?" Sarah counted quickly across the camera feeds. "At least 12, maybe more. They're spreading out to cover all the exits. Someone must have triggered a silent alarm when we breached the server room," Rodriguez said grimly. "We're trapped," Sarah stared at the monitors, watching the armed men methodically searching the building. Her teammates were caught between the basement level where they had rescued Dr. Vasquez and the enemy forces that were rapidly closing in from above. "There's got to be another way out," she said, frantically studying the building schematics she had memorized. Emergency exits, maintenance. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard as she initiated the facility's emergency shutdown sequence. Around her, the server room filled with the sound of cooling systems powering down and hard drives clicking as they prepared to wipe themselves clean. She had maybe 3 minutes before the building's main power systems would fail completely. On the security monitors, she watched the enemy forces react with confusion as lights began flickering throughout the building and electronic locks started malfunctioning. Their systematic search was being disrupted by the cascading system failures she was creating. "Sarah, status report." Sullivan's voice crackled through her radio with heavy static. "Power shutdown initiated," she replied, packing the downloaded files into a secure data storage device. "I'm destroying the servers now. Where's the extraction point?" "Service road, 200 meters north of the building. Chen has overwatch. From the ridge. But we're detecting radio chatter. More hostiles inbound by vehicle." Sarah felt her heart sink. More enemies meant the situation outside was becoming as dangerous as inside the building. She finished installing the final virus that would completely corrupt the facility's data systems, then looked around the server room one last time. In a few minutes, all of Dr. Vasquez's forced work would be erased and the terrorist plot would die with it. The corridor outside the server room was darker now, with only emergency lighting providing dim illumination. Sarah moved carefully toward the stairwell, using the building's layout she had memorized to navigate without the security cameras that were now failing one by one. She had made it halfway to the stairwell when she heard voices ahead, enemy soldiers coordinating their search pattern. Sarah pressed herself against the wall in a shadowy alcove, hardly daring to breathe as 2 armed men passed just meters away from her hiding spot. When their footsteps faded, Sarah continued toward what she hoped would be her escape route, a maintenance corridor that led to an emergency exit on the building's north side. But as she rounded a corner, she came face to face with another hostile, a man who looked as surprised to see her as she was to see him. For a split second, they stared at each other in mutual shock. Then Sarah remembered her training. Instead of freezing with fear, she reacted the way Thompson had taught her. She drove her knee upward while simultaneously grabbing for the small tactical flashlight on her belt, the one that had been modified, to deliver an electric shock. The man stumbled backward, more surprised than hurt, but it gave Sarah the second she needed to activate the shock device and press it against his neck. He dropped unconscious to the floor and Sarah quickly secured his weapons and radio. "This is Wolf Leader," she heard through the captured radio. "Target is a woman, approximately 30 years old, technical specialist. She may have critical intel. Take her alive if possible." Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized they knew exactly who she was and what she had been doing. Someone had been watching the mission from the beginning. But there was no time to think about the implications. She could hear more voices approaching, from multiple directions. She reached the emergency exit and found it electronically locked with a system she didn't recognize. Her override devices weren't working on this particular lock. Sarah realized with growing panic that she was trapped between the hostile forces behind her and an exit she couldn't open. Then she remembered something from her technical training. Sometimes the most sophisticated locks could be defeated by the simplest methods. She examined the door frame and found what she was looking for: an emergency manual release hidden behind a small panel, required by building codes for fire safety. The door opened to reveal the dark forest outside, but Sarah could see vehicle headlights in the distance moving toward the facility. The additional hostile forces Sullivan had mentioned were arriving faster than expected. "Sarah, where are you?" Rodriguez's voice came through her radio. "North exit, but there are vehicles approaching fast," she replied, moving into the forest as quietly as possible. "Change of plans. Head east toward the ridge. Chen will provide covering fire if needed. We're moving to secondary extraction point." Sarah began working her way through the dense forest, using the navigation skills she had learned during training. Behind her, she could see lights throughout the facility building as the hostile forces realized their quarry had escaped. The forest was treacherous in the darkness, but Sarah found that her fear was being replaced by a strange sense of confidence. She had successfully infiltrated a hostile facility, rescued critical intelligence, and escaped from trained enemy soldiers. 3 weeks ago, she had been afraid to speak up in staff meetings. "Sarah, this is Chen," came a voice over her radio. "I have eyes on your position. 3 hostiles moving through the forest about 50 meters behind you. Continue east, but pick up the pace." Sarah began moving faster, no longer worried about the noise she was making. She could hear her pursuers crashing through the undergrowth behind her, close enough that stealth was less important than speed. She reached a small clearing and saw Chen's position on the ridge above, a barely visible muzzle flash that was followed immediately by the sound of a high-powered rifle. Behind her, the sounds of pursuit suddenly stopped. "Threats neutralized," Chen reported calmly. "Continue to the ridge. Extraction helicopter is inbound." As Sarah climbed toward the ridge, she could see the rest of her team waiting at the extraction point. Dr. Vasquez was there too, wrapped in a blanket and looking exhausted but alive. The sound of helicopter rotors was growing louder in the distance. "You did it," Sullivan said as Sarah reached the extraction point. "The intelligence you downloaded is going to save a lot of lives." Dr. Vasquez looked up at Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "I thought no one was coming. I thought I was going to be forced to help them hurt innocent people forever." As the extraction helicopter landed and they climbed aboard, Sarah realized that everything had changed for her. She was no longer the quiet technician who reset targeting systems and avoided challenging situations. She had discovered that she was capable of much more than she had ever imagined. "So what happens now?" she asked Sullivan as the helicopter lifted off, carrying them away from the facility that was now dark and powerless below. "Now you go back to your old job if you want to," Sullivan replied. "Or you consider joining a unit that could use someone with your particular combination of technical skills and operational capability." Sarah looked out the helicopter window at the landscape passing below. Somewhere down there, terrorist plans had been thwarted, a brilliant scientist had been saved from captivity, and critical intelligence was now in the hands of people who could use it to protect others. "I'll need some time to think about it," she said. But even as she spoke, Sarah already knew what her answer would be. She had spent 3 years maintaining targeting systems, learning every detail of how they worked and how to make them better. Now she realized that those skills were just the beginning of what she was capable of achieving. Dr. Vasquez reached over and squeezed her hand. "Whatever you decide, know that you made a difference tonight. You saved lives, including mine." As the helicopter carried them toward safety, Sarah thought about the woman in the photos she had seen just 2 weeks earlier, a frightened scientist who had looked like she was pleading for help. That woman was now free, and Sarah had played a crucial role in making it happen. She also thought about Master Chief Sullivan, who had seen something in a routine targeting system technician that she hadn't seen in herself. He had been right about her ability to stay calm under pressure and solve complex problems. But more than that, he had been right about her capacity to make a difference when it really mattered. The quiet life of resetting targets and maintaining equipment would always be there if she wanted to return to it. But Sarah realized that she had found something she had never known she was looking for, a way to use her technical skills for something that truly mattered, as part of a team that trusted her abilities and depended on her expertise. 3 weeks ago, she had thought she was just good at fixing things. Now she knew she was good at much more than that. She was good at solving problems, staying calm in dangerous situations, and helping people who desperately needed it. The question wasn't whether she would continue this kind of work, but how quickly she could learn to do it even better.